Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 85 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Joined with me is Mike Koomar, and tonight we are previewing the SEC tournament. There were a couple games this weekend, Mike, that we are going to get to. Probably maybe the game of the regular season in college basketball. We had Alabama on the road to Auburn. Not a whole lot to do in terms of the SEC tournament seeding. Auburn has already hung an outright SEC champion banner, but it's the Tide that get the win on the road, Mike. How about this performance from Alabama? And this is now 2 losses in their last 3 for Auburn.
It's actually back-to-back for Auburn. They lost Texas A&M earlier on in the week. A little concerning, I think. I think the internet saw the pictures of the Auburn team partying after they won the outright conference bid, and it's kind of come back to bite them. With that being said, they're still one of the best teams in the country with arguably the best player in the country in Janiah Broome. We can chalk this up to, just a bad game against a really good Auburn or Alabama team. But rivalry games are always funky, regardless of who you're playing. When you get against a game against your rival opponent, it's always going to be fun. It's always going to be close. And this was a spectacular game, Sean, start to finish. Like you said, this might have been the game of the year, but it always just seemed like Alabama was in control from the tip-off. It never felt like Auburn was going to win this game. At least that was my opinion watching that game.
Well, I'll say I think Alabama was in a better position to win the game pretty much the whole time.
Yeah.
And we have seen like a little crazier comebacks or basically like stolen victories where you're losing the whole time and you just get it at the end. But yeah, Alabama's really good. Auburn is really good. Again, Auburn won't be coming off the one line. They're there to stay. They have 17 quad one wins. In terms of Alabama, Mike, this was big for them. Gets them back in the conversation for that 4th 1 seed. And in my projection yesterday, which you can go look up on Instagram if you haven't already, I still have Florida in that spot. Florida did beat them on the road. So just tiebreaker-wise, Florida, the numbers that Alabama's are better than, it's very minimal, but Florida does have more victories, a better resume. So that's why I think you're going to see Florida in that 4th number 1 seed at this point. Now, Mike, they might have a rematch in the semifinals. So potentially that could be a play-in game for the number 1. Maybe the committee has already seeded those teams, but Florida does take care of business against Ole Miss on the weekend.
I guess my question, Sean, if Auburn loses in that first round or their quarterfinal matchup against Arkansas or Ole Miss or South Carolina, whoever, and Florida makes a run and wins the SEC championship, do they steal that 1 seed from Auburn, having already beat them in the regular season?
I don't see Auburn dropping below Duke. I think Duke might get the number 1 overall seed, but the top 3 is the top 3, Duke, Auburn, Houston.
Yeah.
And then that 4th spot is really between Florida and Alabama. Maybe Tennessee can be thrown in that too. They're pretty solidly in the 6th spot for me, but no, I don't think Auburn really has anything to gain from this SEC tournament. And I would not be surprised to see them take it a little easy. But let's get through a couple of these other games first, Mike. Really the only other shocking result of the top teams in the league was Kentucky. They go on the road and beat Missouri. The Wildcats are getting a little healthier. Mike Lamont Butler is back. Not 100%, but he is back. And they win 91-83. I don't think the defensive problems are fixed by any means, but they are defending a little better. They are top 15 in defense since February 6th. That really has been the key for them this year. They have put so much pressure on their offense, and if they can get away with one bad shooting game in the tournament, they might be capable of a longer run than we originally thought.
Absolutely. I think Kentucky, they've started to look a lot better, like you said, metrics-wise on defense. Looking on the flip side, Missouri, they are struggling right now. That's 3 straight losses. This one at home, they also lost to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma on the road. So I think we're starting to be a little bit concerned. Yes, they have players working back from injuries. So they've got a pretty small lineup right now, but I'm very concerned for Missouri heading into postseason play with how they've kind of fallen flat on their face going into this. Look, at the end of the day, Kentucky shot the ball well, but it wasn't, ridiculously good shooting night. They were still just 78% from the free throw line. Shot pretty well from three. They were 55% and 48% overall. But it's not like they just won this game because they made a bunch of shots. They were able to still defend. And part of it is Kentucky's actually going to give up a lot more points than most teams because they're getting a lot more possessions. If they're getting a lot more possessions, the other team is. They're just playing a high up-tempo offense, and you expect to give up more points. But kudos to Kentucky for playing some better defense in the last couple weeks.
And don't let the 6th seed fool you in the SEC tournament bracket.
Yeah.
Kentucky is very much in play for that last number 2 seed. I'll throw up my team sheets here. And, you see Auburn there seeded number 1, Florida at 4, Alabama 5, Tennessee 6. Again, I don't really see Michigan State coming close to Tennessee. And then you've got Kentucky. I've got them down in the 11th spot right now. There is a way that they can get up to 9 or 8, sorry, which is my last 2 seed. Iowa State and St. John's and Texas Tech are in the way. I have A&M just behind them at 12. Might be a little bit tougher for them to get to the 2 seed because their quality numbers, which is, the
probably
Torviks,
not.
the Kenpoms, they're not quite there. But then we keep going down the list, Mike, and this was probably the biggest shock when I did this last, was Missouri really falling, like you said. They're not playing good ball. I have them down to the 25th seed, which is, I believe, on the 7 line, if I have not mistaken. Some people have them down as far as an 8 seed. I think that's a little bit reactionary. They still did win at Florida. They still have a couple of really nice wins. But then after that, we are going to the 8 seeds, Mississippi and Mississippi State, both on the 8 line for me. And then really after Mississippi State, Mike, we get into the bubble. And there was a pretty big game between 2 bubble teams this weekend, and it was a late one. It was a really odd game, I thought. And it was Oklahoma going on the road to Texas in Austin, and it was a game where Texas really needed it, but it was the Sooners that got it. Very important for them. They have 6 players in double figures. Trey Johnson has a tough game, 0 for 14 from the field for the Longhorns. Yeah. Mike, Oklahoma is likely going to make the tournament at this point, and Texas is very close to getting buried.
For Oklahoma getting into the tournament. Clear advantage for Oklahoma getting into the tournament. They beat Texas on their home floor. I, going into this, Sean, thought Texas takes care of business. They're in the tournament. Oklahoma loses, like she gone, unless they make a run through the SEC tournament, because 5 wins in conference is just not enough in any conference, regardless of how good it is. But getting a road win against the Texas Longhorns was huge. And this was a back-and-forth game. This was an exciting game to watch. I didn't get to see much of it because I was tuning into Baylor and Houston. But like you said, Sean, Trey Johnson just could not get the ball into the net. He only had 7 points because he was 7-7 from the free throw line to accompany 7 rebounds and 6 assists. So he was still effective out there, but Texas was just 8 of 21 from 3-point range in this game, to include the 0 for 4 that Trey Johnson was. So, best player in the biggest game of the season, he couldn't come up with it. And now Texas is going to have to go on a run through the SEC tournament in order to get into the big dance.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the bracketology for a second. I've got Georgia here at 35. I'm not going to call them a lock, but they're in pretty good shape right now. I have them above the likes of Vanderbilt and West Virginia. Vanderbilt is probably in that 95% range too. And then here's Arkansas and Oklahoma at 41 and 42 for me, which is the 6th to last team in and the 5th to last team in. I think it's very likely that both of those, you know, are in a good spot right now, even with the possibility of 3 or 4 bid stealers. Um, Now they both do play on the first game of the first day of the SEC tournament. Arkansas just got their doors blown off by South Carolina a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Mike, another loss to South Carolina. I know they're in 16th. South Carolina is just out of the top 75 in the net, so it's a Q2A neutral game. But you don't want 2 losses to the worst team in the league, regardless of how good they are. So potentially, Arkansas is their end if they beat South Carolina, but if they don't, Dayton might be the best case scenario.
Yeah, they're going to be sweating out a little bit if they lose to South Carolina, and that's a very possible outcome for them. You look at South Carolina, how well they've been playing coming down the stretch. That was a tight game that they played on the road at Knoxville, Tennessee, against the Volunteers this weekend. That was not a easy blowaway win for Tennessee, as many of us thought. So a really pesky opponent gave Arkansas the business a couple weeks ago. Yeah, this is not – Arkansas may not be a lock quite yet for the tournament. They got to take care of business against South Carolina. Then they're in for sure.
Yep, and they would face Ole Miss and then Auburn. They're only going 2 deep off their bench right now. Adute Thiero is out. Not sure if he's coming back. But, I mean, if you beat South Carolina, Mike, I think Arkansas just might put their hands up and say, all right, like, we'll take our chances next week.
Yeah.
You know, playing Auburn as a 3rd day in a row when it's their first day, I mean, that's just a recipe for a total disaster, metrics-wise, everything-wise. So maybe it might be better for Arkansas if they don't get there. But if you want to add something on Arkansas.
Yeah, not really. I mean, getting another win against Ole Miss would be good, but I agree, Sean. You never go into a game expecting to lose or
wanting to lose.
Game, but they probably won't win that game, and they'll be fine if they don't.
Yeah, it's for example, that Auburn-Alabama game was practically meaningless to Auburn. They still played really hard. The effort was not why they lost that game.
Nope.
And I don't think any teams are going to be going in wanting to lose, but a couple of these teams with tighter rotations, you might see some players, that usually play 40 minutes, maybe they play 35. And it's not that you don't want to win, it's just that there is something ahead for most of these teams. But Wednesday, Mike, in the SEC is going to be very interesting. Every game has at least one team that's playing for something. Some of them have 2. Vanderbilt, Texas. Vanderbilt wins. They're definitely in. Texas absolutely needs this and probably at least one more to get back into the conversation. But, Mike, a team – this game wasn't very long ago either, if I'm not mistaken. And it was it was Vanderbilt that won at the beginning of February.
Yep.
So – Texas up against it. Vanderbilt potentially not the best opponent for that, but Texas has got to win at least 2 to get back in the conversation.
Yeah, Trey Johnson is just going to have to step up this weekend to get Texas into the NCAA tournament. Vanderbilt's a must-win. We all know that. And A&M is probably a must-win. If they can beat A&M, I think we can, unless there's a bunch of bid stealers that we don't expect, I think they're probably in the first 4 if they beat A&M.
You can put them back into the conversation, and potentially there's Indiana and Xavier play quad 1 games on day 1 of their tournaments, so they wouldn't fall back that much. But you have some Mountain West teams lingering. Maybe they take a bad loss, but you got to win 2 to at least think about it at this point. They might be the 3rd team out at this point, but there is a distinct drop off between my last team in Ohio State and Boise State, or whoever's really put first. I think the at-large teams right now, it's a pretty consensus across the board, which you don't see very much in bracketology.
No, you really don't. It does seem clear-cut this year more than most, but Texas can certainly muddy the waters if they can win a couple games here and get to the SEC tournament quarterfinals. A&M, huge rivalry game. There was a lot of passion there. And if I'm not mistaken, Texas actually picked them off this year. So I definitely like their chances against the Aggies in what would be a very spirited game. If they got to play the other UT, I don't feel as good about that one. Tennessee, that double bye is just such an advantage when you're going to be Texas, who's got to play 2 must-win games back-to-back.
And Texas did split with A&M this year, Mike, a
Yep.
rather large loss on the road, but they did win at home. And he did take Tennessee pretty close. They lost by just 4. So maybe there is, a path there for Texas. But Mike, really the last thing that I want to talk about here in the SEC tournament before we get to who we think is going to win it is this final game on Wednesday night. Georgia and Oklahoma. Georgia near lock territory. Oklahoma on a neutral wouldn't harm them if they do lose it. And Oklahoma is sort of in that same situation. The Sooners could get dragged into Dayton with a loss here, or maybe, some people already have them at Dayton. So if they lose this, maybe get to second or third last team in, then there's some bid stealers. I don't want to say Oklahoma's definitely out with a loss here, but life would be a lot easier for the Sooners if they get this W.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty hard, Sean, to put Oklahoma out and Texas in, regardless of if Texas wins 2 games and Oklahoma loses in the first round. Because of that clear, Oklahoma beat Texas last game of the season on the road. They've got very similar resumes, the same conference schedule or conference record, and Oklahoma had a better resume in the out-of-conference. So I don't think that they should be sweating it in opposed to Texas. However,
I'm just bringing up the numbers here for Texas, Mike, and there is a significant gap already between Oklahoma and Texas. Probably about Oklahoma's 40-44 and Texas is 58-45. Now, if Texas wins a couple games, that's likely to shrink. But even if the resumes match up, they still have that head-to-head tiebreaker that you just said.
Yeah, and it was clear. It was on the road in Austin. Oklahoma got the job done. So I don't really think they're competing for the same tournament bid unless Texas gets to like the semifinals or the finals of the SEC, which I don't see that happening.
I don't either, because I think if there's a couple bid steals, I think Texas is probably out no matter what.
I agree. So when you come down to Oklahoma, yes, I think they're probably a little bit nervous sweating it out on the bubble if they lose this game to Georgia. Georgia, they're in regardless.
Yeah.
But they're not sweating it out in relationship to Texas. It's in relation to Boise or a potential bid stealer in a San Francisco or UC Irvine, something like that.
Yeah, and there's 2 games on Sunday, Mike, that could potentially beat bid stealers. The Atlantic 10 championship game and the American championship game. Now, VCU is kind of a 50-50 if they lose. Memphis is a 100% in. That is the last game along with the Big Ten. Now, if Memphis doesn't make it to the championship game, then there's definitely a bid stolen. But then the committee will just pick a spot for whoever wins it. Doesn't matter. But that is, if Oklahoma bows out Wednesday, they're going to be waiting like 4 whole days for a chance to get it snagged away. It is harsh and it is brutal. But Arkansas, Oklahoma, really the 2 teams that might get snake bitten here. Georgia and Vanderbilt should be okay. And then the top 8, Mike, especially the teams playing in that second session Thursday and Friday, the committee is likely to do their work on these teams already, potentially even have their names on their bracket in the room. So maybe we'll see some seed line jockeying here and there. But if you're in the top 8 in the SEC, you're going to be wearing your home jersey in the first game of the tournament. What are you looking out for as we get past, those bubble battles on Wednesday?
I think this is going to be a really, really fun, exciting tournament.
I think we're going to tell pretty quickly who wants to win and who just wants to play in the NCAA tournament.
Absolutely. And I think Auburn's probably going to have a little bit of fire in them, right?
Yep.
They've just lost 2 straight games. They've been the number 1 team in the country unanimous pretty much for the last, 2-3 months. And they just got bumped from that because of 2 straight losses. How do they respond? Especially because, I don't think Auburn and Duke are jockeying for the same region. Probably Duke's going to go to the East. But Atlanta's pretty close to Duke. You never know. But I do think they're going to be fired up, and also that's going to be a spot that Florida is going to want to be in, right? So potentially they're fighting for that Atlanta region against Florida. They're going to have to come out and they're going to have to perform. Florida's going to look good, and I think Alabama's going to look good. This is going to be a really fun tournament, but I think it's going to come down to I think the winner of that Kentucky-Alabama quarterfinal game is going to end up playing the championship game against Auburn. That's my prediction.
And in terms of like getting fatigued for these top 4 seeds, it would only be 3 games.
Yes.
So I don't really think that's that much of a worry. All 4 of those teams do use their bench enough where I don't think that that's an excuse. They're all going to be 1 or 2 seeds. There is no excuse for them to lose their first round game of the NCAA tournament.
Nope.
You know, if you get into 4 games in a row and then you play Thursday, maybe there is something to that, but not for me. Even Kentucky and Texas, Kentucky has a pretty deep bench. Even if they do make the championship, for example, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal in this league. And Mike, we are a little. This is a little longer of a video than I thought it would be. So let's wrap it up with who do you think is cutting down the nets on Sunday afternoon?
I'm going to go with the Auburn Tigers. They've only got to play 3 games. I think they're going to be a little bit fired up after this past rough week, and Janiah Broom's going to get to work and potentially get a win in a rematch against Alabama.
I'm going to go with the Gators over Auburn. I think Florida is really sort of not really going under the radar because they are, a top 4 team in the country, and they are going to get a number 1 seed, especially if they win the league. But I just think that not having to play Auburn until the championship at the earliest is a really important thing. I think Missouri is significantly worse than Kentucky at this point, so a tougher Friday game for Alabama. So I'm going with the Gators. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this preview. Please be sure to check out the other ones that we've already recorded that we've yet to record, and the videos will be coming out pretty fast here as we're in championship week. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.